Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Brian. My first question is the U.S. maximum pressure on Islamic Republic of Iran continue until when? Because if they don't change behavior, what's next plan?
Well, right now the Iranian regime is managing economic collapse because the supreme leader continues to choose military aggression over diplomacy. And at some point, we hope the supreme leader will start making better decisions for his people and for the region. President Trump has made clear that our campaign of maximum economic pressure is going to continue. We have restored military deterrence, which was lost under the Obama nuclear deal. The regime today faces a crisis of legitimacy and a crisis of credibility with its own people. And we're very pleased with the success that our foreign policy has had. We've been running the same foreign policy since October of 2017, when President Trump first announced the new approach that we would be taking, which is very different than the prior administration. And so it's hard to know how this all ends. We would like to resolve our differences diplomatically. The Iranian people certainly deserve a more representative government. And right now they have a government that represents them very badly, not only inside Iran, but to the rest of the world.
Iranian people, you constantly said that you support Iranian people. What kind of support? I hear that you send them some humanitarian stuff, but what kind of support at all?
Well, I think I would contrast what we're doing with what happened in 2009 during the Green Revolution, when the Obama administration, I think in order to get going on an Iran nuclear deal, really maintained its focus on the regime and lost its focus on the Iranian people. And so that's why during the Green Revolution you had people holding up signs asking whether President Obama stood with the Iranian people or stood with the regime. So when we came to office, the first time that there were protests in November of 2017, in January of 2018, everybody from the president to the Secretary of State to the Vice President all publicly supported the Iranian people and gave voice to their demands on the government. And we have been doing this ever since. The president is now tweeting in Farsi on a regular basis directly to the Iranian people. And we've also expanded the space through our sanctions. I think we've expanded the space for people to protest the regime.
This is great. There is a rumor that you are secretly support a opposition group. This is true? Do you support any opposition group?
We don't support any opposition group. We support the Iranian people, and I meet regularly with the Iranian diaspora. The future of Iran is going to be decided by the Iranian people. It's not going to be decided by the United States government, and that's the way it should be. I've met with all sorts of people around the world. When I was in Los Angeles last month, I met with Iranian diaspora in a number of places. I think at the first speech we had about 800 people. At the second speech there were 1,000. They're really passionate. They're very supportive of our policy to Iran. They love what we're doing. I love hearing from the Iranian diaspora. But we're not going to be picking winners and losers in the groups. I know there's a lot of them. I occasionally meet them when I go to events. But that's not our job to play favorites with all the different groups.
Let me talk about another issue. Islamic Republic of Iran has announced that has increase in nuclear activities. Do you have any plan for, what's your plan actually, prevent Iran from achieving its nuclear weapon?
After President Trump responded to the strike that Iran did on the counterstrike to Qasem Soleimani, he came out to the press corps in the White House, and the first thing he said was, the Islamic Republic of Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. The president is very focused on this, and the Iran nuclear deal really gave the regime a path to a nuclear weapon. And the president got out of it. It was the right thing to do. We're in a much better position to deny the regime a nuclear weapon. Your question was about, that they have been breaking their commitments, their nuclear commitments, repeatedly every 60 days. They've increased the purity of enrichment. They've also increased the stockpiling. And so we've been monitoring that very closely. We want to make sure that they're not getting any closer to a nuclear weapon. But the fact that we're having this conversation reveals the big mistake of the Iran nuclear deal. It allowed them to enrich. Well more than half of the countries in the world today that have peaceful nuclear power don't enrich. You don't need to enrich. And so we think there's an opportunity. If Iran wants to have peaceful nuclear power, there are ways to do that. Russia can do the enrichment, or France can do the enrichment. Iran doesn't need to enrich. That was a UN Security Council standard that the Chinese and the Russians and the US and the UK all unanimously supported. It passed repeatedly in the Council. The Obama administration gave away that prohibition as a concession to the regime. It was a mistake, and the 12 demands that Secretary Pompeo announced when we left the deal, number one is no enrichment. And if we can restore that UN standard, we don't need to have this question anymore about whether the regime is closer to a nuclear weapon.
One another thing, they announced that there are, Islamic Republic of Iran against Middle East peace plan by the US and Israel. And you think by Iranian regime behavior, Middle East peace will happen?
Peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians is Iran's worst nightmare. And for 30 years, 40 years, they have been funding groups to attack Israel. And so whether it's Hamas or Palestine Islamic Jihad or Hezbollah, Qasem Soleimani was the leader of the Quds Force, the Jerusalem Liberation Force. I think in the new Middle East, as I get around the region and talk with a number of different governments in the region, they're tired of this. They're tired of Iran financing all of these terrorist militias who then rockets and missiles that are then fired on Israel. And it does a couple of things. It makes the Middle East very unstable. It keeps a lot of these populations trapped in poverty because their leadership is spending all of its money on weapons and ideological training. And so I am hopeful that this plan that we've announced, which has the support of so many Arab governments as the basis for talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians, I hope the Palestinians come to the table. This is a suggestion, it's a proposal, it's our best thinking on how to resolve a conflict that's been going on really since 1920. That was the first violence between the Palestinians and the Israelis. So we'd like to get to that point. The president has put together a very bold vision for peace, but it's a suggestion, it's a proposal. And if there are things that the Palestinians don't like, then come to the table and tell us and tell the Israelis, and let's get to work.
That's great. Okay. About Iran, many Iranians were delighted to see the children, a few IRGC's members, student, they try to come inside the U.S. by student visa, were expelled. Do you have any plan to expel the children of government or any IRGC's members to expel from the U.S.?
Well, we don't talk about specific visa cases, but what I can say is the president did sign a proclamation announcing that going forward, that none of the children of the regime elite will be able to come to the United States. And we did this because I've heard this complaint many times about the children of the regime elite who come here, and we're aware of it. And so we have put in place a proclamation going forward that prohibits children of the regime elite from coming in.
I present a petition for Iran by name of Free Internet to Iran, signed by 169,000 people. Now they are asking me what happened. This petition for White House and for administration, President Trump administration. What can I tell them? Do you have any plan to help Iranian people to access to internet when Iranian regime cut off internet?
Well, when I came into office, I started working with technology companies in Silicon Valley and elsewhere to see if we could get some technologies that would help the Iranian people circumvent when the regime tries to prevent people from communicating during a protest. Now, I do know that tens of thousands of Iranians have used some of these tools that we were able to grant exemptions from our sanctions regime for these technology companies to do some work in Iran. So the Iranian people already are in possession of some of these tools, and we know that tens of thousands have used them. But the Iranian regime took the unprecedented step of shutting down the internet. And so we have since had a number of meetings here in the Trump administration to figure out the lessons learned from when the regime does a complete shutdown of the internet. Now remember, when they did that, they also shut down all electronic commerce. And the regime lost a lot of money during that period when they shut down the internet. So it's not something that they can do without big costs to themselves. But we are looking at technologies. Every time the regime does something, we then try to come up with a way to help the Iranian people. I've had a number of discussions with some very high-level Silicon Valley executives about things that we can be doing to help Iranians with free speech and with freedom of assembly when the regime either tries to prevent them from talking to each other when the internet's on, or how do they access the internet when it's off. But it's a huge challenge. There is no switch that we can turn on to get the internet back on in a country. It's a fairly complicated thing. I've heard that Elon Musk is working on a global internet, but that's years away. There are things that we're working on, and we're going to keep working at it.
Great. Are you engaged any negotiations with Iran, direct or indirect? And if you want, because Iranian regime said before then everything, they should remove sanctions. What are you doing?
We're not going to pay for a meeting. There's not going to be any sanctions relief for a meeting, but the President and Secretary Pompeo have said in the past that they would meet without preconditions if they would like to have a conversation, but the Supreme Leader has rejected that, and he has not allowed any of his diplomats to talk with Americans. That's fine. We gave him a choice a year and a half ago. He can either, come to the table, or he can manage economic collapse. He continues to choose economic collapse. That's his decision. We're very happy with our strategy to Iran. The regime's facing its worst financial crisis and its worst political crisis in its 40-year history. This is a mess of the regime's own making. The Iranian people know that we stand with them and we support them. The Iranian people know that we have weakened this regime in ways that has no precedent in its 40-year history. We're going to continue to do it because it's the right thing, not only for the United States, but also for the Iranian people. There are no back-channel negotiations going on. Everything that you see that's happening is happening in the public space.
Any message to Iranian people do you have?
Well, this is an administration since day one that has stood with them. We understand their hopes and their ambitions for a government that truly represents them. And I'm going to keep doing everything I can to help them. I think so much of what we would like to see the regime do differently is very much like the Iranian people. The president's going to continue to tweet in Farsi to talk directly to them. So there's a lot of good work ahead. Stay tuned.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.